Okay, so psychosocial development during the first 3 years. Chapter 6. Okay, emotions are things, subjective responses to experience. We can't really measure people's emotions. We have to take their word for it. Just kind of, it's hard to test. But we can really look at arousal, physical arousal. We can look at brain arousal. So we're getting better at maybe figuring out how to measure emotions. But until then, really you look at changes in outside things. Well, physiological, that's your heart rate, your pupils, lots of things change. And then how you act. Infants are pretty much, there's individual variation all the time, but infants are pretty, around the world, are pretty standard in how they both feel and express emotions. However, we learn whether or not it's okay to express emotions as part of our culture. Generally, it is not acceptable in our society for boys to cry or men to cry. It's not that we necessarily cry that much less naturally, but we learn not to. Of course, this causes some problems because men feel emotions in a similar way that women do to a similar extent, but we are less able to express ourselves or in our society. So the behaviors come out some other way. Crying is number one as far as infants and emotions. They are pretty vocal about the situation. Thing to remember in crying is that there are different types of crying, and each one really needs to be dealt with in a different way. Very sharp, piercing cry that occur immediately, that's an indication of pain or fear. That needs to be dealt with immediately. Drop what you're doing as soon as you safely can and see what's wrong with your baby. However, you don't want to give all cries that same immediate attention, because you want to teach the baby that cries, the cries are heard, so you want to be consistent and that they're paid attention to, and that the needs will be met, but there are some needs that are more pressing than other needs. This is kind of the start of learning boundaries, helping your child learn and understand that, sometimes you got to wait. So pain, intense, very sudden onset, squealing, crying, needs to be dealt with. Hunger and frustration, those are things that we really have to deal with on a daily basis a lot of the time. So you need to make sure that you communicate that you are hearing them and that you are paying attention to them. But, unless you're the mom and you're nursing, it's going to take a little while to get food fixed. Generally, hunger, frustration will start out with just kind of maybe talking a while and then kind of maybe yelling at you. But then it works into a little bit of a cry, and the cry becomes more intense as time goes on. You'll learn your baby's cries. If you pay attention to them, you'll have a pretty good idea after a while which ones what you're dealing with. Whereas at first you kind of go through this thing, stick your finger in their diaper to see if they're wet or dirty, jostle them, see if they just want some interaction, activity. Feeding should be one of the last ones you try, but it does tend to be one of the first ones. Baby gets fussy, shove a bottle in their mouth. In general, if it's baby's real fussy, my recommendation, you stay there and be real careful, but soak them in warm water. Soaking infants in warm water often has a really fine effect to them. But again, back to hunger, you've got to fix the bottle, you've got to warm the formula, mix it, whatever you have to do. And so you want to kind of communicate with the baby, let them know, you can even hold them there at first and let them see that you are doing things, and they'll grasp after a while that all they need to really do is let you know what they want and you'll get it for them. Frustration's the same way. I get frustrated every day. I imagine most people do. It's part of life. So what you're trying to do is kind of prioritize, let the baby know that the communication is happening, but that there are priorities. Because this is a part of life, and this is where you start teaching babies boundaries. And I think that's a real useful thing. People who don't learn boundaries, or let's say parents who don't teach boundaries, tend to cause their children problems. It's more difficult to tell when the newborn is happy. If they're not crying, generally it's a pretty good thing. Entertainment, it's easier to tell when they're happy. In the first month, babies tend to be quiet. Do know that they do smile, even right off the bat they smile, but those first smiles may just be cortical activity, or they might be gas. So do be careful. You know that the baby can only see you 6 inches to a foot away, so you're holding them up close as they smile so they can see you smile back at them, and then they burp. And know that burp is going to be very, very juicy. So don't dress in your best clothes. They do smile when they're moved. When you interact with them, they grow into cooing. They're trying that language out. They're trying out some of the sounds that they're hearing. They do learn to smile, but again, they are able to at birth. Self is very important in understanding about ourselves. For infants, it's just understanding that they are separate from their environment. Like I said, they don't understand that first time they suck on their thumb that that's their thumb and their mouth, but they understand that things feel good. Awareness comes a little bit later on. Self-consciousness, thinking about yourself and how others may perceive you. Embarrassment, empathy. Embarrassment is feeling how you think people are judging you, and empathy is understanding how people are feeling. It's putting yourself in their shoes. This is something that Piaget said that infants really have no empathy, and really children won't become empathetic until say about 7 or so. But there's some evidence that we are fairly born with at least some levels of empathy and sympathy and understanding of other people. Self-evaluative emotions, that's pretty self-explanatory, just how you evaluate yourself as a human being, as a contributor or non-contributor, as a good person or a bad person, or however you may feel about yourself. It is generally pretty important to feel some positive emotions towards oneself. So pride, shame, and guilt, these require socialization and self-awareness. You really have to understand where other people are coming from and how they might view you and your behaviors. So children, and don't we all, and we say children here, but when you look at most of this, we may do it better or more extensively or something along those lines, but we still do these things, at least some of us. So empathy is the ability to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes, to stand where they stand and feel and think how they feel. Don't have to agree with them, just understand where they are and maybe a little of how they get there. Does require social cognition, which is an understanding of others and their thoughts. Children tend to be egocentric. They tend to think of things from just their point of view. Many of us tend to get better, but I'm sure that you know of people who really can't see things from anybody else's point of view and never gotten past that stage. So again, we view others and try to, judge them to some degree, judge our own behaviors and thought processes. Again, Piaget said that really kids didn't have it till after about age 7, but I think there's something biological, evolutionary about empathy, because if you are in a neonate ward or with a bunch of new babies, if one starts crying, very often they all cry. And fairly often in toddlers, if there are some toddlers playing, they're not going to play together, but if they're playing in the same area, if one starts crying, another one will get up and walk over and pat its head, maybe say nice things to it, pretty much whatever their parents do to make them feel better, sometimes even offering their own toy to the crying infant or toddler. So there are others who argue that at least some of us are born with a reasonable amount of empathy that then develops over time, or doesn't, depending on what we learn, how we learn, that sort of thing. So egocentrism, ego being the individual, is somebody who thinks about it only from their own position. Brain growth, cerebral cortex, that's the gray matter, the wrinkly part that we tend to think of as the whole brain, but it's the outside portion. It's actually very thin, but very wrinkled. It becomes better as the dendrite connections between the neurons extend. The frontal lobe, we're going to talk about the frontal lobe through adolescence. It's very important because the frontal lobe is where we think, where we plan, where we control our emotions. The limbic system has a lot to do with emotions along with learning and survival. So the limbic system is kind of your id, and the frontal lobe is the combination of your superconscious and your ego. So some of us, the limbic system has a lot to do with hormones, survival, so it's pretty active and makes a pretty big impact. So as the infant interacts, as their brains mature, as things become more together, they grow, they're able to understand themselves and others, control their emotions, hopefully, that sort of thing. So again, you probably know people who still can't control their emotions, never got past this point, but most of us do. Okay, temperament was talked about in the video also, a biological predisposition of reactivity and of activity. What this is that some of us react to stimuli in the environment more intensely than others. A lot of it, most of us are somewhere in the middle, but some people are real laid back, some people are not, are real fussy. You may have heard of the parent's curse. Parent's curse goes, may you have children just exactly like you. And this tends to be pretty truthful to a great degree. These temperaments are heritable. They can be changed given a lot of encouragement if a child is shy, or if you can have a very easy outgoing child that you just ignore and beat the hell out of a lot, and they may learn not to be that way. They may become a more difficult, more shy type child. But we can do fairly well predicting from the uterus, from prenatal growth, reactions during prenatal period. If a fetus reacts extremely to sounds, sudden sounds, or foods, or things like that, then they may be a more difficult, more highly reactive child. So how you deal with the world. 3 general temperaments: easy, generally happy, responds well to change and novelty. They tend to be a little bit more in the way of thrill seekers. They may be leaders, they may not be, but they generally get along with people. They typically easy to get along with. So they're nice children to have. There are some problems. Sometimes they want to be a little bit on the pleasing side. They want to please people, that sort of thing, so they may be led astray more easily than some. But in general, they're going to do all right in life because they're flexible and they'll be able to deal with it. Slow to warm up. Can appear to be a difficult child, a shy child. Fairly often they're very, we had our youngest, even up until just about age 8 or so, if we introduced him to somebody, he would be hanging behind us, and I'd have to pull him around to shake hands or whatever, but within 10 minutes of meeting the person, they're very comfortable with them, and very, very much more an outgoing type person. So they tend to look kind of hesitant, but after if you can urge them to get past that initial situation, they generally do very well. Difficult kids, irritable, intense, emotional responses. These people I'm pretty convinced, experience stimuli, life more intensely than, say, the normal population. And we look at people with OCD, Asperger's, autism, that sort of thing with this. And one of my children his sense of smell is much better than anybody else in the family. His sense of hearing is much more acute. Particularly kids' skin is much more sensitive than adults, and until he was pretty much a full adult, he had trouble wearing a number of different types of material just because it felt so rough on him. So they're hard to get along with. They're not very flexible. And on the other side, as far as it goes, it's tough on the parents. It's tough bonding with them. It's tougher on a lot of different levels, and their lives tend to be quite a bit tougher also, because life really doesn't care much what we think about schedules and stuff. It just does things the way it pretty much wants to, and easier people tend to do better and have a happier life than difficult people do. Goodness of fit is a special ed kind of thing. It really is trying to adjust your parenting in a way that best benefits your child. Helping them learn the way they learn best. An easy child, not a big deal. They're real flexible. They don't have an extreme amount of needs. They're fun to be with most of the time. But again, physical stuff, it kind of depends on definitely the needs of the individual child, but the socially and cultural stuff, difficult children are going to have more trouble learning these things. And sometimes they have to learn things that we take for granted and as having learned over with experience, they have to really do it on an intellectual, educational kind of way. They don't really understand the way other people think. Or very often they don't really understand why they think the way they think. But one of the important things to remember is that real strict upbringing for difficult children is much more likely to end negatively than if the strict upbringing with an easy child. Going toe-to-toe with somebody who's difficult is generally a lose-lose situation. So other methods of manipulation are more appropriate. Okay, Harlow. Harlow was a famous researcher using monkeys to look at how they interact and such, and one of his most famous experiments had to do with mothers, and basically it was a cloth mother that felt good and the baby liked, but it had no food, and a wire mother that had food but no comfort. What they found was that if the baby was upset, it always went to the cloth mother, not to the food mother. What this demonstrates is that we really need contact comfort. I mentioned in infancy failure to thrive. That's an indication that an infant hasn't gotten the hugging, the contact comfort that it needs. So, like I think I pointed out, even adults need some hugs every once in a while. If we don't, we tend to get cranky. Fathers, mothers tend to be, and it's definitely not an all the time thing, but the mothers tend to be much more involved in their children. They have invested so much in bringing forth a living thing and keeping it alive those first little bit, that it's a huge investment. Dads, we have much wider variety of commitments and involvement as far as it goes. One of the reasons that we got into education is so I would have those summers and those breaks to be with my children and to have some other interactions, because I was pretty common, normal for my age group, and my father was gone most of the time. Sometimes I'd see him on a daily basis, sometimes not, and generally not more than for a few minutes any time. He was a busy man. Women stayed at home and raised the kids, men worked. So I really wanted to do something differently and being more involved with my children. So things have changed. A lot more dads staying home with their kids and such. So things are improving, I think. Gender differences. Okay, gender is what it means to be male or female. What it is to be really I prefer masculine or feminine. What it is to be male or female on a sexual level, that's a hormonal and chromosomal thing. But how we learn what's okay for a male and what's not, and what's okay for a female and what's not. So gender is the concepts that we put with male or female, not the sexuality of it. Gender typing is how we socialize children to be males or females, masculine or feminine. It starts off immediately. The first thing people ask when a baby's born is it a boy or is it a girl? We dress them up in different clothes. We treat baby boys different than baby girls. We use different words to deal with them. We behave with them differently. Just immediately we start to differentiate whether they are boys or girls and impress upon them those differences.